Welcome to one of Mr. Walsh's World Geography videos. As you can see, this is a review of our study guide. We have already done it in class by now, and you should have this all filled in. Many of you who have looked at it have stressed at it and have told me it's too much. When you look at this study guide, many of you see this. And trust me, Mr. Walsh understands that's a lot of blank spaces to fill in. There's a lot of information you have to go over. But don't fret, because by this point, your study guide should look like this. If you had followed along in class, it should be filled in. But if not, please don't stress. Don't look at the person next to you. Don't blame your parents. Watch this video once, twice, 35 times, doesn't matter, as many times as you would like, just to make sure you have the right answers. The first topic that we studied on the study guide was the last topic we covered in the unit. It should be fresh in your mind. The main area was West Africa, and we focused on Nigeria. Nigeria, we stressed that it was one of the top oil-producing countries. It has a high GDP, but could even have a better GDP because of the political unrest kept Nigeria from profiting as much as it could in recent years. Nigeria is extremely diverse. It has over 250 ethnic groups. Even with all the different groups and all the different languages, the main language is English. Why English? Well, because they gained their freedom from Britain in 1960. They have had civil war issues since then, but have a federal republic, which is when a government shares powers between states, national governments, and you have voting, and it should sound familiar. Why? Because you're in 6th grade. You just studied the United States government briefly in 5th. If not, ask Mr. Walsh, he can fill you in. Now, the other focus we looked at was the Democratic Republic of the Congo. A lot to say. Also, it's gone through many different names. The Belgian Congo was its name from 1908 to 1960. After breaking free from Belgium, the Congo went through a period where it was called Zaire. A brief time in history, as we would say, but to many of you, over 20 years, that's a long time. Once you grow up, you'll realize that in historical terms, it's not that long. But if you ever hear the word Zaire, it's still referring to the Congo, just a little outdated. No matter what it was called, it always had the large rainforest, which is known as the Congo rainforest, even though it has had a lot of destruction to this natural wonder due to deforestation. Now remember, deforestation is when you cut down and destroy forests without replanting. Now, some of the resources you find in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is copper and diamonds. Also, if you look at its history through its civil war issues, Mobutu Sese Seko, one of our favorite names, but a dictator that stole from his own country, has led to a lot of issues in the country that are still struggling today at times. As we look north from the Congo, we do find Libya. Again, another country rich with oil and rich with the technology using pipelines to bring water to its main cities of Tripoli and Benghazi. Like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it has had trouble with dictators such as Gaddafi, which we looked at before. He ran a dictatorship until he was overthrown in 2011. Why should we care? Well, the United States and the United Nations were forced to put trade barriers because of poor decisions by Gaddafi. And these trade barriers were called trade sanctions. It's just like when you do something wrong, your parents take something away from you. Well, when Gaddafi did something wrong, the United States and the UN took something away from him. Money because of trading, that's all. Now, next to Libya is the largest country in Africa. If you remember anything from Algeria, it is the largest country. It is the big country at the top of Africa. It's got a lot of history itself. It too was a colony, but it was a colony of France and broke free from France in 1962 and now has a strong president and legislator, just like the United States as well. Now, when you look to the south of Africa, you find South Africa, officially called the Republic of South Africa, has the most highly developed economy in Africa. Also, it has important exports, which means as minerals such as gold, diamonds, and platinum, things that you have actually seen in your lives. And if you haven't, you've seen pictures of, you're familiar with. Remember, exports means it comes out of the country. Now, it's had a dark history like some of the other countries we've studied, and it too used to be part of the British Empire just like the United States, but the country itself was ruled by the white settlers, as they would call themselves, or Afrikaners. These white South Africans established apartheid and controlled the non-European population. But apartheid was broken apart in the 1990s, and they wrote a new constitution based on majority rule. Remember, the majority is the most of the population, and when they vote, the person that gets more votes wins, which should sound familiar. Remember, also which should sound familiar, is a constitution, something we have in our U.S. history, something that you should have covered last year, and it's a document describing structure and powers of a government and the rights of its citizens. Remember, one of the most important figures is Nelson Mandela, who helped South Africa out of the apartheid history. The other history in Africa we talked about was the slave trade. Remember, what continent sparked the slave trade? Which would be the Americas, North and South, which we've already covered this year. Also, between the 15 and 1800s, there was 12 million people sold into it, and they usually followed this pattern that we've talked about. People were captured by other African tribes, sold to Europeans, shipped over the Atlantic, and surviving slaves were traded to the plantations. Now, by the 1800s, the slave trade was slowly dying out, which means not altogether. It didn't happen one day people woke up and that was it. It slowly, over decades, died out. It started with Britain declaring that the slave trade was unjust and illegal, only in Britain, which means you could still trade outside of Britain, but it was a start. As the slave trade died out, more Europeans went into Africa, and as they did, they brought medical help, railroads, new fertilizer, and roads. But remember, they took raw materials for their own economy. Most of the time, they weren't exactly paying the right prices for them. Europeans and African wars, which was another subject we covered, helped with the movement of independence for many of these areas. South Africa region, so in the surrounding areas around South Africa and South Africa itself, in the 1870s and 1880s had the Zulu Wars between the Zulu tribes and Great Britain. Later on, in the 1880s, the Mahdi's War between the Sudan, Great Britain, Egypt, and Ethiopia occurred, and the Algerian War between France and Algeria in the 50s and 1960s. By the late 1900s, things started to change. Remember, by 1945, countries slowly started to gain independence. After World War II, the countries that were controlling African areas were running out of money, retired from war, and by the 1960 beginning was a huge year because countries started becoming more independent at a rapid pace. After independence, many civil wars broke out because of many problems, but Africa's abundant resources have led to conflict as well during this period. Now, some of the conflict, well, when we studied East Africa, we saw that in Rwanda, genocide, remember the killing of one type of people because of their ethnicity, race, religion, and background, killed more than 80,000 people. Also in Somalia, because of civil wars and a bad economy, piracy has been off the coast. Now, as you re-look through this guide, you should feel comfortable with the information we have reviewed in class and continue to review. If you have any questions, you know to ask Mr. Walsh. Now, things I would like to thank. One, FIFA, because of this great picture from the FIFA World Cup. Maybe I should update it with the African Cup of Nations picture, but for now, this is what stays. And Disney, Hans Zimmer, and anyone else that helped produce The Lone Ranger for the great music, which I will leave you on. And remember, this has been Mr. Walsh. I'll see you in class tomorrow, or at least the next day we meet.